He walked into the most luxurious restaurant in Beverly Hills, wearing a faded hoodie, worn-out sneakers, no security, no reservation. Some looked at him with annoyance, others snickered with quiet mockery. The waitress looked him straight in the eye and sneered, "Are you sure you can even afford to eat here?" No one knew that, just a few hours later, the same man they had mocked would make the entire restaurant bow their heads in shame, would leave that arrogant woman sobbing in the center of the dining hall, and force the city's fine dining scene to re-examine itself. Everyone thought he was just out of place. But no one realized he was the founder of the entire restaurant chain. Stay until the end. You'll understand why. Never judge someone by how simply they dress, because sometimes they hold your entire future in their hands. Are you ready to begin? Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. Beverly Hills shimmered under the nightlights, its sidewalks lined with sports cars like a silent parade of the elite. At the heart of the district, Celestine, a five-star restaurant, sparkled like a gem, with crystal chandeliers glowing, glasses clinking gently, and luxury woven into every detail. As the glass doors of Celestine rotated open, a tall, dark-skinned man dressed simply stepped inside. Malik Johnson, once an NBA superstar who dominated courts across the country, had long since left the spotlight of professional sports. Now he was a discreet businessman with influence stretching from real estate. To the world of fine dining, he was a silent investor behind the Celestine restaurant chain. But almost no one knew that. Malik preferred to stay out of the limelight. Tonight he wore a slightly wrinkled silver-grey hoodie, plain joggers and worn sneakers. No jewelry, no bodyguards, no reservations. With his towering height, he entered quietly, just another customer. And that's exactly how he wanted it. He glanced around the restaurant's dazzling interior, then made his way to a quiet corner by the window. He approached the host stand calmly. None of the staff recognized that the man standing before them owned a stake in the very place they worked. But in just a few seconds, the entire restaurant would be swept into an undercurrent of chaos. Because they were too quick to judge, and far too slow to recognize the true worth of a man. As Malik stepped up to the host stand, a cold voice sliced through the otherwise serene atmosphere. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" It was Jenna Ross, Celestine's longtime veteran hostess. With her perfectly tied hairbun and flawlessly pressed uniform, Jenna took pride in her polished appearance and impeccable service standards. But what stood out more than anything was her quiet arrogance, especially toward those she deemed beneath the standard. She eyed Malik from head to toe. His worn hoodie, casual sweatpants, and faded sneakers, then offered a thin, practiced smile. "Celestine is reservation only. This is a place for refined diners who know where they're coming to." Her words rang just loud enough for a few nearby guests to turn their heads. Several pairs of eyes drifted toward Malik. A mix of curiosity, hesitation, and faint disapproving smirks. Malik remained calm. He tilted his head slightly, his voice composed. "I understand. I was just hoping for a quiet dinner. If there's a table available." Jenna raised an eyebrow, her expression now dripping with visible condescension. "Oh, there are tables. But I'll find one that's more appropriate for you." She turned, her footsteps deliberately smug as she led the way. Malik followed silently. No arguments, no explanations, no need to prove himself. But that silence was about to become the loudest protest Celestine had ever witnessed. The click of Jenna Ross's heels echoed across the hardwood floor. Steady, cold, like the drumbeat of a social execution. She didn't stop at the row of tables by the window, where chandeliers sparkled over crystal wine glasses. She didn't lead Malik through the elegant center section. where well-dressed diners laughed over fine wine, waited on by smiling, polished staff. She deliberately turned into the far back corner of the restaurant, right next to the kitchen. The air here was filled with clattering pans, sharp kitchen calls, and the mixed aroma of heavy spices and seared meat. Gone were the golden lights, the pristine table linens. In their place, a small table pressed against the wall, dim lighting, and an atmosphere more fitting for a budget diner than a luxury icon. Jenna turned around, her smirk thin and eyes raised high. "This spot seems more fitting for you." She dropped the menu onto the table with a hard thud, then stepped back with her arms crossed, like someone fulfilling an unpleasant chore. Malik remained composed. He pulled out the chair, sat down gently, as if he hadn't heard the insult at all, but others heard it, loud and clear. At a nearby table, a young couple exchanged looks, then glanced over at Malik. The man frowned, the woman shook her head and whispered, "She went too far." Across the room, Mr. and Mrs. Langston Dash, an elderly couple and long-time regulars of Celestine, had begun to take notice too. Mr. Langston set his wine glass down, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. "He's unusually calm," he murmured to his wife. Malik said nothing, not a single word of protest. Just a quiet glance toward the kitchen, a faint smile, and the menu opening softly in his hands, as if nothing had just happened. But Jenna wasn't finished. In her mind, this was only the opening act of a lesson in humiliation. She believed she was delivering to someone she saw as out of place. Malik looked up after a few moments of quietly scanning the menu. The dim kitchen light cast soft shadows across his face. Calm, silent but radiating quiet strength. He gently closed the menu and said, "I'll have the filet mignon Rossini and a glass of red, Chateau Margaux 2015. The moment he spoke, the air seemed to pause for a beat. Jenna Ross narrowed her eyes. That was the most expensive item on the entire menu. Prime beef tenderloin prepared with foie gras, black truffle, and a signature red wine reduction. It was widely known as the king of main courses at Celestine. Only the elite dared order it without looking at the price. Jenna curled her lips into a sneer, and then gave a small, mocking laugh. She leaned in toward Malik, her voice low, but just loud enough for two nearby tables to hear. "Do you even know how much that dish costs?" Malik smiled softly, answering in a calm, even tone. "I do." Jenna chuckled under her breath, a smug half-laugh laced with pure condescension. "Just making sure. Wouldn't want you mistaking it for a fancy burger or something." A faint huff came from the next table. Camilla Reyes, a young businesswoman dining alone, looked up and fixed Jenna with a cold, hard stare. Her expression made it clear she was starting to feel more than uncomfortable, but Jenna wasn't done. "We serve people who truly appreciate fine dining, not those who just want to put on a show." Malik stayed composed. He didn't fire back. He didn't flinch. He simply gave a quiet nod. His gaze calm, not angry. So calm, in fact, that for a brief moment Jenna hesitated. From the central dining area, Mr. Langston gently placed his knife down on his plate. "She's testing the patience of the wrong man," he murmured to his wife. The atmosphere inside Celestine began to shift. Gone were the quiet whispers about wine pairings and exotic cheeses. Now a hum of murmurs had begun. About Jenna. Camilla raised her wine glass, her eyes still locked on Malik. "He doesn't need to prove anything," she muttered. "She's exposing herself." Jenna turned on her heel and walked away, that arrogant smile still lingering on her lips. In her mind, she was still in full control. She had no idea that every word she had just spoken had ignited a quiet resistance, and she was now at the center of a storm she never saw coming. Malik sat quietly at the table near the kitchen, where the lighting was dim and the clang of pots and pans echoed in steady rhythm. The space around him no longer felt like a place for fine dining, but more like a hidden stage, where arrogance and prejudice had just been put on open display. Yet he remained seated, calm, composed, no frown, no reaction, no demands. He simply sat, hands clasped, eyes gazing toward the restaurant's elegant main floor, as if none of what had happened touched him at all. And that silence, serene but powerful, began to draw the attention of everyone around him. At a window-side table, Camilla Reyes, dressed in a deep crimson satin dress, sipped her glass of Pinot Noir. A prominent entrepreneur in the startup world, she was no stranger to women like Jenna Ross, those who judged others based on shoes, jackets, or hairstyles. She crossed her arms, eyes fixed on Malik. From the way he didn't retaliate, didn't display offense, only nodded with quiet dignity, Camilla knew this wasn't just any man. That level of patience usually means real power, she murmured to herself. At the center table, Mr. and Mrs. Langston Dash, an elderly couple and former investors in the hotel industry, were also watching closely. Mr. Langston set down his utensils and leaned toward his wife. "Do you see him? No one sits through that kind of humiliation and stays composed, unless they know exactly what they're worth." Mrs. Langston finished, her gaze still locked on Malik. Meanwhile, Jenna, completely unaware of the silent shift in the room, continued strutting between tables like a performer in her own show, confident, self-satisfied. But what she didn't realize was this: her every step was no longer that of a guide, but of someone being watched. And Malik, with his almost unsettling calm, was slowly revealing who truly held power in this glittering room, and who, beneath the shine, was the weakest of them all. Jenna Ross continued her little game. She deliberately ignored table 18, where Malik Johnson sat. Though the restaurant wasn't especially crowded, she walked past him at least 3 times, each time glancing his way, then sharply turning toward another table, flashing the kind of sweet smile Malik himself had seen not long ago, but never directed at him. No other staff member was assigned to his table, and it was obvious the neglect was intentional. 15 minutes, then 25, nearly 40 minutes passed. No apology, no water, nothing. At one point, Jenna even muttered, "Some people come in just to see how it feels, then slip out quietly when they realize they don't belong." She said it loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. She didn't name names, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. The atmosphere inside Celestine began to shift. What had once been the soft hum of polite conversation, the clinking of fine cutlery, had now become an uneasy silence. Guests who had been watching from the beginning were now whispering to each other. The looks they gave Jenna, once admiring, were now filled with suspicion and slowly turning to disappointment. In the corner, Camilla Reyes furrowed her brows and turned to her dinner companion. "This isn't just unprofessional anymore. This is discrimination." At the center table, Mr. Langston slammed his wine glass down, startling his wife. He leaned in, his voice low but firm. "If I still ran my hotel group, she would have been fired tonight." And yet Jenna Ross remained blissfully unaware that things were no longer under her control. She thought she was winning. She thought she was making a point. But in truth, every word she spoke, every smug glance was turning into cold water, dousing her own career. And that truth was about to come to light more clearly than ever before. By the time Jenna Ross passed Malik for the 6th time, without so much as a glance in his direction, the soft murmurs inside Celestine had turned into cold, hard stares. No one was smiling anymore. At a table in the corner, where 2 women were quietly dining, one of them picked up her phone and began recording openly, without even trying to hide it. I'd heard rumors that Celestine discriminated, But now I'm seeing it with my own eyes, she whispered Dash, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. And it wasn't just them. At Camilla Reyes's table, her phone had already been flipped upright and recording. As a tech entrepreneur who'd spoken at international conferences, Camilla knew the power of video evidence, especially when it exposed discrimination inside a place that prided itself on luxury and refinement. "This isn't just bad service anymore," she muttered, eyes fixed on the screen. "This is a toxic culture." But Jenna still had no idea. She was turned away from her target, laughing softly with a wealthy couple near the wine bar. And as she passed by Malik's table once again, she let slip a final cutting remark. Some people just shouldn't try to step into a world that wasn't made for them. A line dripping in prejudice, and this time, it was captured in full, both video and audio. At the center table, Mr. Langston glanced around, then sighed and said quietly to his wife, "We're witnessing something much bigger than a ruined dinner. This is a moment that could reshape the entire service industry." Malik still said nothing, but he saw everything, he heard everything, and he understood something clearly. There was no need to speak anymore, because the truth was revealing itself, louder than words ever could, and the name Celestine, once celebrated for flawless service, was now staring down a night it would never forget. At the window-side table, bathed in soft golden light, Mrs. Whitmore, a former philosophy professor at Stanford, sat quietly, her eyes observing Malik Johnson with quiet intent. She wasn't filming, she wasn't whispering. She was simply watching. "Ava," she said softly, her voice deep and steady, steeped in wisdom. "That man, he's not ordinary." Her 17-year-old granddaughter, Ava, looked up from her dessert, surprised. "What do you mean, Grandma? He's just sitting there." Mrs. Whitmore gently set her spoon down on the saucer, her eyes never leaving Malik. It's the way he sits, the way he watches people. He's not afraid, he's not angry, he's composed, like someone who's led many people. For a very long time. At that moment, Malik was still seated in the back, the very spot Jenna had chosen to humiliate him. But the way he held his gaze, the precise fold of his napkin, even the graceful nod he gave to the one server, who brought him water without judgment, it all spoke of a different class. At a nearby table, Camilla Reyes was starting to put the pieces together. She leaned toward her dinner companion and whispered, "I think I've seen this man before. At an investment summit 2 years ago in Atlanta." Her companion raised an eyebrow. "Wait, not Malik Johnson, the one who backed that restaurant chain in New York?" Camilla straightened in her seat, her eyes widening. If it's really him, then Celestine just dug its own grave tonight. Back in the restaurant's security booth, manager Daniel Mercer was staring at the live surveillance feeds, and suddenly stopped breathing. One of the junior staff whispered behind him, "Sir, that man at the back table, he looks a lot like Malik Johnson." Daniel quickly pulled out his phone, opened the internal investor directory dash, and froze. The face on the screen was the exact same face on table 18. It was him. It was Malik. The sharp clack of leather shoes against the wooden floor echoed like a warning bell, a signal that everything was about to change. From the management desk, Daniel Mercer, the general manager of Celestine Beverly Hills, rushed past tables, muttering under his breath, "It can't be. Is it really him?" As Daniel neared the back table where Malik sat, his face turned pale, his grip on the restaurant iPad tightened, and his heart thudded like a drum about to burst. Then he stopped, and in front of the entire restaurant, he bent slightly at a 45-degree angle. His voice low, respectful, stunned. "Mr. Johnson, we had no idea you'd be joining us tonight. I sincerely apologize for the oversight in your service." A stunned voice rang out from somewhere in the room. "Johnson!" Heads began to turn. Whispers rippled like waves across the tables. Malik Johnson. He's the major investor behind the entire Celestine chain. Unbelievable. They've been treating him like a second-class customer all night. Across the room, Camilla Reyes sat slack-jawed. Mr. and Mrs. Langston exchanged a long glance and let out a breath. "I knew it," Mr. Langston murmured. "That was the look of a man who's led people." Just then, Jenna Ross emerged from behind the bar, a tray of water in her hands, and froze. Everyone, staff and diners alike, had turned to face one direction, toward her. Jenna's eyes followed theirs. And there, she saw Daniel bowing before the man in the wrinkled grey hoodie, the joggers, the scuffed sneakers. The very man she had mocked, belittled, and seated by the kitchen like some walking emblem of lesser class. Her face turned from white to crimson. The tray in her hands began to tremble. "No, no way that's him. It can't be," she whispered, as if trying to claw her way out of a nightmare becoming real. Malik looked up, his expression calm, his smile steady. "It's all right, Daniel. I just wanted to enjoy a quiet dinner, like any regular guest." But the restaurant was no longer capable of regular. Every eye now locked onto Jenna. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was ice cold. The very guests who had said nothing before now shook their heads, faces sharp with quiet judgment. At a nearby table, Camila Reyes leaned in and whispered, "This isn't just a lesson. It's a test, and she just failed it. Spectacularly." The air inside Celestine had turned heavy, like lead. What started as a few hushed whispers was now a rising wave of murmurs sweeping through the room. The guests seated near Malik's table leaned toward one another, but this time they weren't commenting on his worn sneakers or plain clothes. "I just looked it up. It's really him, Malik Johnson." "Oh my God, seriously? The former NBA star turned billionaire investor. He's the one behind the whole Celestine chain." At the central table, Camilla Reyes slowly set her wine glass down. Her sharp eyes narrowed like she'd just solved a complicated riddle. "I knew I recognized him," she said to her companion. "Do you know who backed the acquisition of the Armonia Hotel Group last year?" Her friend shook his head. Camilla smirked slightly. It was him, Malik Johnson, one of the most powerful silent investors in fine dining, luxury real estate, and resort development. Near the exit, at a quiet corner table, Mr. Langston gently set his wine down and nodded in deep respect. Not everyone can sit in a room full of judgmental eyes and still hold themselves with that kind of poise, unless they know exactly what they're worth. His wife leaned in, whispering softly, "I've never seen someone dressed that simply, and yet silence an entire room like this." At that moment, Jenna Ross stood frozen, trapped in the flood of truth. Each whisper around her sliced through her pride like a silent blade. She looked at Malik Dash, the man she had mocked, seated near the kitchen, belittled with remarks loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. That dish is not for everyone, only those who really understand it. Now, everyone understood. But it wasn't the dish, it was the lesson. Malik remained seated, calm and composed. No crossed arms, no furrowed brow. He simply lifted his gaze, sweeping it slowly across the room. At the stunned, embarrassed, and silently shifting guests. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet question. What do we really judge people by? In that moment, Celestine ceased to be just a fine dining restaurant. It became a mirror dash, reflecting arrogance, prejudice, and the first flickers of regret. In the eyes of many who had once felt so certain of their own superiority. Inside Celestine, the air felt like it had been vacuumed out of the room. Every guest, from those near the windows to the hidden corners, now knew who the simply dressed man truly was. Malik Johnson. Jenna Ross stood frozen, Her face had turned pale, her hands trembled as she clutched her order pad. Less than an hour ago, she had strutted past him with disdain in her eyes. Now she was the one under the spotlight, and no gaze in the room held sympathy for her. Malik gently set his napkin down on the table. He stood up, not with force, not with drama, just with quiet, commanding presence. He turned to Jenna, and when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, a blade of truth slicing through the silence. Do you think good service is a privilege reserved only for the wealthy? Jenna stiffened, her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Malik stepped forward. He didn't loom, he didn't threaten. He simply stood with the quiet strength of someone who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove it. I walked in here without $1 million watch, without Italian leather shoes, but I was still a customer. You looked at me and decided you had the right to judge who I was, where I deserved to sit, and how I should be served. Where exactly did you learn that kind of professionalism? Jenna opened her mouth again. Only a breath came out. No words. I'm asking you, Malik continued, his head tilting slightly, his eyes unwavering. What's your definition of respect? No one spoke. Near the bar, Camilla Reyes gave a subtle nod, as if echoing Malik's question with silent support. At another table, Mr. Langston leaned over to his wife and whispered, "That's not just a reprimand. That's a lesson for this entire room." Jenna lowered her gaze. Tears had begun to well at the corners of her eyes. But Malik didn't speak to humiliate her. He spoke to reach whatever dignity she still held inside. We don't get to treat people poorly just because they don't look like the kind of customer we expect. If that's the case, then the problem isn't them, it's us. The entire restaurant was silent. No laughter, no whispers. A few staff members lowered their heads. Some looked at Malik with deep respect. Others looked at Jenna with a quiet, complicated pity. Not because she'd been humiliated, but because she was now standing at the edge of a moment that could either break her or finally wake her up. The clinking of silverware at Celestine had long gone silent. After addressing Jenna in front of the entire dining room, Malik Johnson turned to manager Daniel Mercer. His voice remained calm, but carried an unmistakable steel edge. "Daniel, I want every staff member to stay after closing. No exceptions." Daniel swallowed hard and nodded quickly. Yes, Mr. Johnson. I'll notify everyone right away." Malik didn't say another word. He simply looked around the room. The servers bowed their heads. A few diners politely rose and nodded to him before leaving the restaurant. Not out of fear, but respect. 10:10 p.m. Celestine closed its doors. Every staff member was gathered in a circle in the main hall. Some still wore their full uniforms. Others stood slightly behind their colleagues, eyes anxious and unsure. Jenna stood at the very end of the line, her eyes red, order pad clutched tightly in her hand. Malik stepped into the center. No podium, no microphone. Just a man with a calm voice, and every word hit like a hammer on steel. "I'm not here to threaten anyone, and I have no desire to shut down Celestine, a place where my team and I have poured our hearts into for years." He paused. His eyes swept the room. "But I cannot allow one branch to represent my brand as a symbol of arrogance, bias, and neglect." The room was absolutely still. Jenna lowered her head further. From his pocket, Malik pulled out a slim folder. An internal service quality report. He held it up, not with drama, but with clarity. "This is a record of anonymous complaints collected over the past 3 months by our monitoring team. Not just one, not just Jenna, but multiple instances. Staff judging customers by appearance, dismissing those who don't fit the Celestine standard." He took a deep breath and continued, "I'm giving you 2 options. Option 1, a full team restructure, retraining, starting from scratch, and I will personally oversee it. Option 2, I withdraw all investment, terminate the lease, and shut down this location within 30 days. No one dared breathe too loud. Veteran employees exchanged glances, silently asking, "Is this really happening?" Malik finished with a single direct statement. "I don't want apologies. I want commitment, and I'll wait for your answer in 15 minutes. Daniel Mercer stepped forward, shame etched deep into his expression. "Mr. Johnson, on behalf of the management, we accept the restructure. We've let things slip too far." Several younger staff members nodded in agreement. Some teared up, and from the far end of the circle, Jenna Ross slowly raised her head and stepped forward. "So do I. I want to change. If there's still a chance." Malik looked at her. No words, just a quiet nod. As if to say, "Your real battle isn't over yet, it's just begun." The air inside Celestine's main hall felt frozen in place. Every word Malik had spoken still echoed in everyone's mind. And then, Jenna Ross, once the proud, sharp-tongued server of this establishment, slowly stepped into the center of the circle. She was no longer the composed woman with cutting remarks, just a trembling human being struggling to keep her legs from collapsing. Jenna clenched her hands tightly, took a deep breath, but the moment she tried to speak, tears spilled down her cheeks. I have no excuse." Her voice cracked. The tears came freely. "I've worked here for 7 years. I thought I knew everything. About guests, about service. But somewhere along the way, pride turned into arrogance. I judged people by the shoes they wore, the clothes on their back." She turned toward Malik, eyes red but gaze unwavering. "I disrespected you. I disrespected the values Celestine stands for. And worst of all, I disrespected my colleagues, the ones who work every day to hold on to kindness." Malik said nothing. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, quietly listening. "I thought I was strong, but all I was doing was shielding myself from change. And in doing so, I lost the one thing that truly matters in this profession: humility." Some of the other staff members lowered their heads. Many had tears in their eyes. Camilla Reyes, still standing quietly in a corner, clutched her handbag. The Langstons whispered to each other, "She finally sees it now." Jenna bowed once more. "I'm not asking to keep my job. I only ask for a chance, to make it right, not with words, but with actions." She didn't expect forgiveness. But Malik's gaze remained gentle, not condemning, not theatrical. He watched her for a long moment, and then nodded. Softly, humanly. A man who once battled in arenas before tens of thousands, now simply accepted the tears of someone broken by her own mistake. No fury, no revenge, just listening, and leaving room for hope. The room remained silent. The air felt like it was holding its breath, every eye fixed on Malik Johnson. He walked slowly toward Jenna Ross, the server who had made so many diners uncomfortable that evening, now standing with her head bowed, tears streaming down her face. Malik wasn't angry. He didn't blame. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke, slow, calm, but with steel hidden beneath velvet. "If I came here just to fire someone, I wouldn't have waited until now." The entire restaurant went still. "I don't want you to be fired, Jenna." Jenna looked up, eyes wide in disbelief. Many others froze as well, surprised. Malik continued, "I want you to change, not to keep your job, not to appease public opinion, but to do something you've never fully done before, to see the worth in every person, even if they're not wearing designer clothes or shiny leather shoes." Mr. Langston nodded softly, eyes glinting. Camilla Reyes, who had witnessed it all, whispered under her breath, "Now that's real leadership." Malik turned to the entire Celestine staff, raising his voice slightly. "All of us have made mistakes, but very few have the courage to own up to them the way she just did tonight." He paused, then turned back to Jenna once more. I won't be the one to decide if you continue working here. Your actions in the coming days will do that. Jenna nodded. She couldn't speak. Her tears still fell quietly, but this time they were tears of a beginning. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is giving someone the power to start over, to grow from the very mistakes they made. And that night at Celestine, a door opened, not for a guest, but for a human being, learning once more what it means to be kind. 6 months later, Celestine still shone brightly in the heart of Beverly Hills, but the glow inside was no longer the glitter of chandeliers. It was the warm light of a spirit reborn. At the reception desk, Jenna Ross, dressed neatly in uniform, hair tied back, face calm and focused, was speaking to a group of new employees. Her voice was clear, gentle, but firm. At Celestine, we don't just serve food. We serve respect. Every guest who walks through that door, no matter who they are, deserves to be welcomed with genuine hospitality. In the group, a young waitress hesitantly asked, "What if they're dressed really casually?" Jenna smiled and responded immediately, "That's even better, because you'll learn the most from someone who isn't trying to impress you, but still becomes unforgettable." At a table by the window, Malik Johnson sat quietly. No one around him recognized who he was, and he preferred it that way. In his hand was a small cup of espresso, and in his eyes, a calm gaze from afar, not to inspect, but to witness. He saw Jenna gently pick up a napkin that an elderly guest had dropped, saw her smile warmly at a modest-looking family who stepped in with slight hesitation, and saw that she was no longer the same woman from 6 months ago, but a new role model inspiring those around her. Celestine had changed, not through money, not through fame, but through a lesson simple, yet profound. Dignity isn't in a wallet. It's in the way you see other people. On the restaurant's wall, near the entrance, a new bronze plaque had been mounted. Etched on it were the words, "Welcome to Celestine, where every person is respected, not for their status, but for their humanity." Malik smiled softly, stood up, and left in silence. No applause needed, no words of thanks. He knew the mission was complete. In a world where people are too quick to judge based on appearances, the story of Malik Johnson at Celestine stands as a powerful reminder. You don't need a designer suit to deserve respect. You don't need fame to be treated with dignity. One quiet man walked into a restaurant, and through calm, through character, he made an entire system reflect on itself. I don't want you to be fired. I want you to change for yourself. That wasn't just a message to one waitress. It was a message to all of us. If you've ever been judged unfairly, remember, composure is power. If you've ever looked down on someone without meaning to, remember, you always have the power to change. Share this story if you believe kindness can change the world. And never forget, never judge someone just because they walk in quietly, because sometimes they're the ones who will rewrite the entire game. See you in the next story.